Hello and welcome to lesson 5 of the GCSE Germany unit video lessons. Today we're looking at something that most people get but are not very good at explaining how it actually works, but more importantly, again, the thing we keep on coming back to, what the effects of this are on Germany and how this causes political problems down the line. So on the picture there you can see two very clear images of hyperinflation when money has lost its essential value. A road sweeper sweeping it up all the worthless notes and someone burning them to keep warm. So there are three major causes. The first two are stuff you might want to mention to show off. In reality, most people will be talking about the Ruhr crisis, and that's cause, and that was the major trigger cause. But you can argue there's also two longer-term causes which causes problems, and this might be worth mentioning, particularly aiming for the A or A star, if it comes up. You don't have to explain it if it doesn't, but it's something well worth thinking about going forward. So the first thing is that Germany, as we've mentioned before, had to borrow loads and loads of money even before World War I ended. Its plan was that it will borrow loads of money and after that print loads of money, because when it wins the war it will get loads and loads and loads of money and land from the people it beat. Obviously, well, the problem with this is when they lost the war, this plan is very bad. Like, it's fine to borrow loads of money and print lots of money if you're going to get lots of money later. But if you borrow lots of money and print lots of money and then suddenly you don't have any money coming in, then obviously all you've done is just borrow money which you can't pay for and print money which has no value. Okay. The second major cause is the fact that under the SPD they wanted to build something called the welfare state. The welfare state is the idea that the government looks after the health, economic sanctity and happiness of the people. We live in a welfare state because we have an NHS, we have benefits, etc. In order to pay for the welfare state, it had to decided it wanted to raise taxes. Unfortunately, it couldn't really raise taxes too much because people would have said, well, you're raising my tax so I can pay reparations. So the government was spending more because it's trying to build a welfare state, pay for healthcare for people, pay for people's benefits, unemployment benefits, sickness benefits, old age benefits, pensions and that sort of stuff. But it couldn't raise taxes because the Allies, the Germans would believe that the Allies are being given the money in their taxes and therefore hate the government and refuse to pay taxes. Okay, so what they decided to do instead was, rather than pay reparations, they would spend the taxes on the welfare state. People will be happy that they're getting a pension, they're getting healthcare, and that will help the government's popularity. Obviously, though, this will cause problems because the Allies will not necessarily look kindly upon the fact that the government are refusing to pay reparations. So, the major cause, which is the Ruhr crisis. Germany has not paid its debts. It hasn't paid for its reparations in the year of 1922. So, Germany's plan was to basically see what happened. They were hoping that the Allies perhaps will use this as, we can't possibly reduce our reparations. But instead, because the French Prime Minister, particularly at the time, was running up to an election, and the one way to lose an election is to be nice to Germany in post-World War I, they ended up deciding that they weren't going to be nice to Germany. Instead, they were going to use what is their right under the Treaty of Versailles to enter the Ruhr, a very, very rich industrial region full of factories on the border between Belgium and France and Germany. They would occupy it with 60,000 troops, including some Algerian troops, which the racially charged right-wing propaganda will spend a lot of time discussing. The government had three choices. So you've got soldiers here who are in the Ruhr. Their job is to stay there until they've got enough stuff made in the factories to pay for the reparations. Okay, the government has three options. They can tell the workers to work, they work stuff, and they'll give the stuff to the French and they'll go. This would be very, very, very unpopular. The French, in the eyes of many German people, have just invaded Germany. They've come into Germany. There will be about 120 odd people killed as part of this French occupation. There's a picture of one there of a German man and a French soldier. And for the government to be so weak and give in and say, okay, you tell you what, here you go, have all the stuff, this would probably likely destroy the popularity of the government. So the government can't do that. Option 2 is to fight back and shoot all the French soldiers, but obviously the army is too small and too weak and the country is too weak and they'll lose that war. So what they decide to do is a way in the middle. They will do resistance but not through force, or passive resistance. Since the French are in the Ruhr waiting for the goods to be made in the factories so they can take the goods and to the value of the reparations, what the German government did is they encouraged the people to go on strike, and in order so that they wouldn't make anything. That means the French wouldn't get their stuff, and eventually the French would have to leave. Now, in reality, if someone's on strike for a day, that's fine. But if you want someone to go on a strike for weeks and weeks and weeks and months, they have to eat. So what the government promised to do is to pay the workers their wages. And so with people going on strike, the walkouts and all that sort of stuff, the government is paying for the workers' wages. This is a problem. As we shall see, this will cause a massive inflation and a massive loss in the value of the currency. Essentially, this meant that the Germans had to pay loads and loads of marks to those who had lost their jobs or at least were on strike, but at the same time had less income from tax, partly because it would have taxed the wages on the workers, but it doesn't have, partly because it would have taxed all the goods that would have been made in the Ruhr, but obviously no goods are being made. And as well as that, the amount of stuff being made in Germany, the amount of items being made, also decreases. Thus, the only way to sort of bridge that gap is the government prints more money. What this causes, and we'll explain why and how this causes it in due course, is a massive hyperinflation. The big thing this means is essentially, as you can see in the picture there, money loses its value. Okay, money becomes basically worthless, and what would have cost £1, so say I don't know, a cost of coffee £2.50. What would have cost a small coffee would have cost £2.50. Now would cost significantly more, £25,000, for example. Okay, if you look at the rate of inflation. This means that if you are someone who has savings, you have £2,000 in the bank, that would have been a lot. But now that money is now worth far, far less, that £2,000 won't even buy you a Costa coffee anymore, when it would have bought you hundreds of them before. We'll explain all that in due course. So, hyperinflation. The golden rule of economics is this idea of supply and demand. Supply is how much of something you have, and demand is how much people want it. So if you have a high supply, so say if I've got cars, I've got loads and loads of cars, I have a high supply of cars, but say people don't want my cars, and the demand is low, in order to make people want my cars, I have to reduce the price. So if supply is bigger than demand, the price of things goes down until it reaches its point. So if I half the price of a car, eventually the amount of cars I have and the amount of people who want it will be roughly the same, and that's its correct price. Likewise, if I have a very small supply of something, so diamonds, although actually, as I would have mentioned in lessons, they're very, very actually common, but say I have a small supply of gold, for example, and a lot of people want gold, then what I can do is I can rise the price. So if the amount people want goes up and the supply goes down, that leads to the price going up. So if supply is higher than demand, because there's more stuff than people want, the price goes down because you want to encourage people to buy the stuff. If supply, if I only have a little bit of something, is smaller than demand, I have a lot of people want it, I can say, well, who's going to pay me the most for it? And the price will go up. So, if we think about this in terms of money, now this is going to get a bit technical, and in reality, everything I'm going through here, unless you're going for the A star, particularly A star, you don't need to worry about this. I think it's important to know how economics works. This is why I've included it. But as long as you say the government prints more money without any increase in the economy, and therefore hyperinflation happens, you'll be fine. But so you can skip to the next, I don't know, 2 minutes or so. Anyway, a price of something is say roughly the German economy had a certain amount of money, the demand. Okay, if people have more money, then obviously they will be able to buy more, they'll demand more, and have a certain number of stuff made, the supply. And if it's equal, prices basically stay the same. Okay, because essentially there's the exact same amount of money, demand, there's just amount of supply, and so the prices, whichever they're at to get to this point, are basically fine. Yeah, because it would otherwise, if the prices were too high, then the demand would be lower, and therefore that would cause the prices to go down. If the prices were too low, then the demand would be too high, and then the prices would go up. So it's an equilibrium, shall we say. What happens is, by printing more money, the amount of money that people have in their pockets goes up. Okay, there's more demand because you have more money. You go, oh, I can buy another thing, I can buy another this, I can buy another that, so I'm going to buy some stuff. Likewise, at the same time, since some of the most profitable and most industrial areas of Germany were on strike and therefore not making anything, the amount of stuff made goes down. Okay, so because of striking, because of the Ruhr's on strike, the amount of stuff goes down. So therefore, there are more people with money in their pocket than there is stuff. Okay, what this means is inflation. The price will go up because now, we haven't got as much stuff and lots of people want it, I'm going to put the price up. What makes this hyperinflation is this gets out of control. The amount of printing becomes absolutely ridiculous, and therefore loads and loads and loads of people demand have money in their pocket. This is because once you have a little bit of inflation, so you pay workers, I don't know, 200 marks to be on strike for a week, for example, and that's brilliant. Go back to our old slide. That's brilliant, fine, but this causes inflation, and therefore those workers are like, hang on, I can't buy as much of this with this 200 marks because the prices of everything has gone up. So I want more money. So obviously what the government does is it goes, fine, prints more money. But then that causes more inflation because as the amount of demand goes up, as more people have money in their pocket, the price of things goes up. As the demand gets bigger and the supply gets smaller, then the price of things goes up. So this gets worse and worse and worse. And then what happens is after inflation hits a certain point, we start to see two bad effects. Many people who trade with Germany start realizing that they're charging marks, they're charging money, which, when they initially sort of sold it to Germans, was worth a lot. And now they've been given what there used to be a lot of money, say 1,000 marks for it, but now that's less good. That's less money than they thought it was. It's worth less. That money is now, because of inflation, that money is now worth less. So many international traders think, you know what, when this inflation is happening, I don't know how much this good is worth. I don't know if it's going to be worth the same amount in a week's time. I better not trade with Germany, or at least I will reduce the trade with Germany just in case. That obviously means there's less stuff in Germany, less stuff coming into Germany. That means the supply goes down, which means that you have a bigger gap between supply and demand because there's lots more money being in people's pockets, but there's much less stuff. That means inflation goes up even higher. At the same time, many businesses who assumed that the prices would be the same had bought all this wood, for example, to build beds. I don't know, build beds, and they bought this wood for 1,000 marks, and they sold the bed for 2,000 marks. And that made them a profit. However, they sold the beds for 2,000 marks now, and some of them didn't keep up with the price rises, and suddenly that 2,000 marks is worth nothing. And if they want to buy some more wood, it's now worth 10,000 marks. But they don't have that money because where's that going to come from? And so many businesses fail because they're selling stuff, they don't keep up with the inflation. So then what happens is, as business fails, there's less stuff made in those businesses, therefore there's less supply, so then again there's more inflation. And then what happens is obviously even further things, because then the government is now, as inflation has gone up even higher, has to keep printing more money to keep people paid, which in turn leads to more inflation, which leads to more businesses failing, which leads to more external companies not wanting to spend money selling stuff to Germany or building new factories, investing in Germany, which means there's less stuff. And as well as that, on top of all of that, that leads to less supply, more price rises. Because of that, if you are a business that's still in business, the way you survive is go, okay, I've got two choices. I don't know how much this is going to be worth in 2 weeks' time. So what I'm going to do is I've got two choices. I can either go under what it might be worth, or I might go over. So obviously everyone goes, well, I'm going to charge, I don't know, 100,000 for this, even though I think it's only worth 80, just in case, because we might lose value in due course. I'm going to charge more. That only adds to more inflation because the price has gone up even further. So what happens is a very, very vicious cycle. As money is printed, people don't trust it, people are scared, therefore they keep prices high, and therefore the difference between supply and demand goes on. Once again, you don't need to know this for A-level, for GCSE, it's far too much detail, but just if you're interested, this is how it works. Anyway, specific examples. The Daily Mail on 29th of July 1923 pointed that the prices of goods change hourly. So for example, a gramophone, that thing on the left, at 10 AM in one shop on the 29th of July was 5 million marks. By 3 PM it had gone up to 12 million marks. The Daily Mail cost 35,000 marks on the 29th of July, when it would have cost 2 or 3 in 1919. And on the 1st of July it had gone even higher, to a day later to 60,000 marks. So this is this idea that price rises is happening so quickly because people are panicking. Now this is obviously chaotic, and we're going to talk about the political effects of this in due course, but never underestimate how rapidly this happens. The real period of hyperinflation is really only in 1923, although there is actually a rise in inflation from 1919 because of the war debts, as we mentioned, and the welfare state, as we mentioned. But what makes it hyperinflation, i.e. inflation which is happening so rapidly, is from about the Ruhr crisis, about May onwards of 1923. Now, before we go on to the political effect, which is the very end of this lesson, we need to look at how this is fixed. And this is fixed in August 1923 by a guy called Gustav Stresemann. Stresemann is a member of DVP. The DVP are an anti-democratic party. They have always voted against democracy. But Stresemann is also not a man who believes in right-wing dictatorship per se. He is a monarchist. He wanted the Kaiser back. And he feared that if his party sat by and did nothing while the hyperinflation was going through, then what's going to happen is two things. A massive right-wing dictatorship, probably not like monarchy, or a communist revolution. And neither of those are good. So he does not like democracy, but he decides, I am going to help democracy and support democracy because it's better than the alternatives. So he becomes Chancellor, and as we shall see in the future lessons, he is a very, very skilled man. He'll only be Chancellor for about a couple of months, well, just under a year, but he will live on as the Foreign Minister up until 1929. Stresemann knew he had two jobs. He had to basically invent a new currency. He couldn't go on this old currency of millions and millions and millions of marks. He had to create a new currency. Okay? However, before he did that, step one is that he needed to stop the thing which was causing this. And that was the Ruhr crisis. So the first thing he does in September 1923 is he tells to the French that he agrees to sort out to pay back reparations, and he gets the French to agree that actually look how chaotic things have got. This isn't good for you, like it isn't good for us, because we might get a more crazy right-wing invasion-focused guy instead of us, so you might as well help us. So that's step one. He ends the immediate cause, which is the problems in the Ruhr, the strikes in the Ruhr, and the government stops having to print money to pay the workers. However, step two, which is build a new currency, is harder. Because you can't simply just print a new note. Because people won't trust that you will never print it again. Like, people won't trust that you won't do the same thing in that. They'll just assume you're going to print like you did before with the new currency. And the new currency will become worthless afterwards. What people therefore need is confidence in the currency. Confidence that the currency won't be printed on. Banks, other countries will not spend money, give money, trade goods and otherwise with Germany until people trust that they'll get, their money is safe. So he does a couple of things. He by law says that the new currency, the rented mark, has replaced the old mark, and by law it can only be printed to a certain extent. Anyone who prints more is liable to be arrested or prosecuted. He also fires 700,000 government employees to make the government balance budgets, so basically means it's spending as much as it is getting in a tax, to reassure many people that the government is now responsible, it's sensible, it's running the country properly. As well as that, and the biggest thing he did is he opened the Reichsbank. Now actually there was a Reichsbank before, but not like this. This is a formal official bank, like our Bank of England, which had Hammerschaft, a guy we'll meet later, in charge. He had, and the bank had, complete power over the level of printing, and he only had one job. He could not be fired except for a very, very hard process involving the Reichstag. His only job was to stop inflation from happening. He had to keep inflation low. He could not be fired so long as inflation was low. He was not a politician, he is an economist. Therefore, he didn't need to seek election. So what Stresemann is doing here is he's trying to show the world, look, we can't print anymore by law, but look, also, the only guy who can doesn't have to worry about getting elected, doesn't have to worry about making people happy, and therefore the only thing he needs to do to keep this quite good job is keep inflation low. Therefore you can trust him to make sure that no more money gets printed. So what this does is this encourages people and encourages foreign businesses to start spending money and lending money to Germany again, because they believe that actually this currency won't lose its value like the other. So what were the effects on different groups in society? Now, in reality, hyperinflation affects different groups very differently. The people who are particularly hurt are the middle classes, but we're going to go through them group by group. The upper classes weren't as badly affected. Obviously, they had savings which were wiped out, but most of the upper classes had their investments, had their money in assets. That's i.e. non-cash. They had it in land. They had it in buildings they owned and they rented out. They had it in gold. They had it in jewels. And the thing about these things is, even if money loses their value, these will not. And that, even if, the smart thing to do is not to sell them when there's hyperinflation happening. But as long as you kept hold of them, after hyperinflation ended, they were basically worth the same. So they didn't really do that badly at all. They lost a bit of money, but nothing too bad. Some, like Steens, who is an industrialist, did really well. He saw hyperinflation coming. He decided to take out a loan for 1 million, well, actually even more than that, millions of marks, more than anyone could possibly pay back. He bought up loads and loads of businesses, loads of land, and then 2 months later, once 1 million marks, everyone had, he paid back his loan, which was only 1 million marks, or a couple of million marks still. Okay, so he was very smart. He took out these loans when 1 million marks meant a lot, or millions of marks meant a lot, and then paid it back when millions of marks meant nothing. In fact, I have 1 million marks on my desk somewhere, okay, because it's so common. But what it did do amongst the upper classes is only further show them this idea that the Weimar Republic was incompetent. The Weimar Republic couldn't run the country, and what was needed was a strong authoritarian leader. Never underestimate the thing that this never happened under the Kaiser and how that persuades many people. The working classes, we're going to skip the middle class for now, were also less affected. People who are getting paid a wage, because the government's printing so much money, because the factories are saying, okay, now this gramophone is worth 1 million, now 2 million, now 3 million. And what they'd do is they'd pay their workers more and more as the price of gramophones went up. And obviously that money is not worth anything, but it means that they're at least keeping up with the prices. So their wages roughly kept alongside prices, although in reality it didn't quite keep up. And obviously it's a massive inconvenience to have this whole system. And also the big reason why the working classes weren't affected is very few of them actually had any pensions or savings, because they're usually quite poor, which means that they didn't have as much to lose. Now that brings us on to the middle classes. If you own land, so long as you don't sell it during a hyperinflation, when it's over, the land is still there and the land is still worth the same. If you don't have any savings and don't have any pensions, you haven't really lost anything. If you only live on a wage. If you live on a wage, your wages go up. That's partly what causes the hyperinflation, is the fact that as soon as inflation goes up, all the other people and all the other factories need to get paid more, which means the price of the goods made in the factory goes up, etc., etc., etc. So what happens is, for working class, they get wages. Now, obviously, the middle classes aren't broke because they get paid wages too, and as companies that they work for, and as the government prints more money, they can pay the middle classes more, the money to sort of balance off inflation. Obviously, it never quite matches, and you are out of pocket, but not overly. What really happens is it makes existing savings worthless. Okay, so let's explain this. If you're saving for a child's university, for example, and you've got 10,000 marks in the bank, that's a healthy sum in 1990. Now, the way the banks work essentially is you've got that 10,000 in the bank, and say you've got a 1.5% interest rate, which is what we have at the moment. Every year that goes up in size by £150 or 150 marks from that 10,000. What this means is that while times are good, essentially that money probably isn't making lots of money, but is basically worth the same. However, as goods become more and more worthless, and as prices go up and up, in 1919 that £10,000 could have bought a nice deposit for a house for your student child, or at least got the first years of fees for your child who's going to university. And now, because of hyperinflation, the cost of all those things have gone up massively. The cost of the university places are now in millions and millions and millions of marks. The cost of the houses are millions of marks. And but you still only have 10,000 marks in the bank. You can't buy anything. So that's what we mean by worthless. The money doesn't go anywhere. It's still got 10,000 marks. But what you can buy with 10,000 marks gets significantly less. So that wipes out the savings. Additionally, if you are on a pension, the way pensions work is essentially you put in a little bit of money every month, and when you hit a certain age, you get, say, 200 marks back. When the economy is good, 200 marks a week is actually quite good. You're doing quite well. However, the pensions don't change how much they pay depending on the economy. So you're always only going to get 200 marks. That's fine. However, what happens is, as inflation goes up, you could have had bought your groceries for those 200 marks in 1919. Now those 200 marks won't even buy a cup of coffee, and so you are living. Either you are a pensioner and you're living and life is hard because you can't pay for anything, or all that money that you've saved from your pension that you were going to retire on in 10 years, now you're only going to get 200 marks, which is basically worthless, and therefore you make no money off it. So this is why the middle classes are particularly badly affected. Because those on fixed income, i.e. pensioners, that fixed income, which doesn't change, is now worthless when you think about how expensive everything else is. Savings, which you all have, which middle classes are far more likely to have. They're less likely to have enough money to own land or buildings, but still have some money. So they're likely to have it in banks, are now made worthless. As well as that, many of the people who were fired, as you mentioned, of that 700,000 who were fired by Stresemann, were middle classes, but usually managers. Okay, all of this hurts them and destroys their material circumstances. This has a couple of effects. This obviously leads to many people hating the Weimar parties, who they blame for the economic chaos, and many of them become disillusioned and blame democracy for this. This didn't happen under the Kaiser. This is the fault of democracy, and therefore they become very good targets. They become nice. They become sympathetic and more likely to listen to the far right wing. They are also permanently scarred. What that means is, next time there's an economic crisis in 1929, they will panic and fear that exactly what's going to happen, what happened here, the complete loss of their livelihoods and their savings, will happen again. And it will mean that they will, in desperation, grasp onto someone who offers an extreme but reassuring promise that they will fix it, and that is Hitler. And you should never underestimate the fact that the Nazis are a middle-class supported party. More middle classes for the Nazis than any others. The communists are working class, the Nazis have the middle classes. And the one thing it also does, it has a vast psychological effect on the middle classes. Middle classes rely on there to be stability. They rely on a bourgeois idea that life is going to always be the same. There's always going to be order. Things are basically fine. By seeing things so ripped up upside down, so things are destroyed, and see how quickly things can crumble and how quickly their livelihoods can crumble, many of them increasingly become scared about their futures. And people who are scared about their futures very often want reassurance from strong, evangelical, and futuristic-looking, and particularly wide-ranging, charismatic politicians like Hitler. So people's loss of status, their fear for the future, ties in nicely with Hitler, who provides a vision and a model of the future, which means they will survive. So, in reality, the political effects of the hyperinflation go into two categories. There's an immediate loss in support for the Weimar democracy and Weimar parties. And at the very least, even if people keep voting for these parties, many more are cynical about them. Many people who vote for the SPD because they're not religious, and can't quite bring themselves to be DNVP supporters yet. They end up going, even if they keep voting for the SPD, thinking that this party isn't great, it's the best of the worst options. So when a good option comes up, like the Nazis, they will switch their allegiance. So the first thing it does, obviously, is it makes the middle classes and their opinion of democracy decline. Now this is really important because the workers, many of them have already left democracy, and the upper classes never liked them. The middle classes were the few groups who were lively pro-democratic in this period. And what hyperinflation does is it alienates and scares them as well. As well as this, it has a massive psychological effect on those people in Germany, which means that when the next depression will come, they will be more desperate, more fearful, and therefore more willing to trust in Hitler. So the big things about hyperinflation I really want to point out is it profoundly affects the middle class more than anyone else. And this is bad because these were the only people who were really properly supporting democracy up until this point. And it basically means that this last group of supporters have now left and now gone, weakening democracy. It means that even if they don't vote for extreme parties now, they have lost that love, they have lost that regard, they have lost that respect for democracy. And so next time there is a chaotic economic situation, they are not going to trust the old parties to deal with it because they dealt with it so badly this time. Instead, they're going to go for a more extreme, more radical, more hopeful, and more new solution, who in this case will be Hitler. This is the end of the first quarter. The first quarter is 1919 to 1923. The big question being, why is Germany so chaotic? And all your questions, all your notes should be this idea of how do each of these events cause problems. The next one, as we shall explain next lesson, is the 1924 to 1928 part, which is a little bit more focused on this idea of was it calm, was it not calm, in what way was it calm, in what ways was it not calm, was it golden years, etc. So once again, when revising this section up until 1923, always focus your notes less on what's happened, but how does this affect democracy, and how does this undermine and harm democracy particularly. Okay, thank you very much for listening. We'll be doing the golden years. That's going to be a very long one, because we're going to do essentially an entire quarter of the course in one video lesson. But until then, I will see you later.